Thanks for inviting me along. It's a real pleasure to speak here. We've got, I believe it's 510 days until the referendum in September next year, and we're told that this is far too long. We should have had this referendum ages ago. You know, that many people are now telling us that we're going to be going round and round in circles and arguments, and you hear this. It's become boring. It's circular. It's become kind of Punch and Judy show. But I think there's a lot of people who are saying this are missing the point, because we've got a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. Very few people in any country have got a chance to build a brand new country from scratch, a brand new nation state, and we need time to reimagine Scotland, to dream a little bit, to look at the type of Scotland we want to live in. And this takes time. This takes discussions. You know, this is a beautiful thing about it. This is something brand new. Very few people get a chance to do this, and we're doing it for ourselves, for our children. We get one shot at this, I think. I think if we don't get it right in 2014, it might be a long time before it comes round. And then beyond that, we have to get it right as well. And this is where Radical Independence Conference and progressive forces have to think beyond the referendum. I just want to talk a little bit about that. The question of reimagining Scotland. But I think most of you will probably agree with me. I don't think it's particularly radical to say it among radical people, that what we're looking for is a much more equal society, a much more just society, a society where we can increase the health and happiness of the greatest number, especially those 25% at the bottom who've been left behind in the society that we live in. It's very simple ideas, and increasing the prosperity and wealth, but most importantly the more equitable distribution of it, because after all, wealth is created collectively in any society, no matter what anybody says. So this is what we're looking at. Very simple ideas, but very radical ideas. How they pan out into specific areas of policy is something that, you know, this organisation has begun a fantastic debate, engaging people and looking at different aspects of policies. I mean, some of the things, I don't think we can look ahead without fair and progressive taxation being at the very, very top of the agenda. It's not being discussed by any of the political parties. You know, none of them are talking about fair and progressive taxation. But this is very important. Land reform, including land taxation, this is something we need to discuss. There's a new sort of phrase entered the political lexicography jargon. It's called shovel-ready projects, and I think there's nothing more shovel-ready than building social housing so that everybody's house has security of tenure. Also the question of re-examining the role of the banks. I think this is very important. We're building a new country, and we've seen what can happen if we get it wrong with the banking system from the country we're trying to get out of, the state we're trying to get out of, and we need to look at breaking up the banks, the ideas of nationalising the banks or creating small localised banks. It's quite interesting in Germany. Small localised banks are what sustains local economies. You know, Germany is always portrayed as a great Euro-centralist banking system. So those are some of the ideas. But what I would like to ask a question at this conference, and it's a question I think that it needs to be asked from now until 2014 and beyond, is do we have the democratic infrastructure to facilitate radical change? You know, we all know that lasting radical change only comes from the grassroots up. That's something I'd like to have a wee examination of here, we talk about here. The secondary question, which this is very pressing, and I've not even heard it raised really in any seriousness yet, is do we have the democratic infrastructure to create a new nation state? Because we're not just electing a government in 2014 or even in 2016, we're creating a brand new state, a state for all of our citizens, an inclusive state. And that means there's practical hot potatoes need to be considered. You know, we've seen discussed the question of the currency that we have in this new state, whether it's the pound sterling, whether it's a euro, or we have a Scottish pound. It's a question of the head of state. Do we keep the monarchy, or do we have an elected head of state, or do we have no head of state? There's the question of which international organisations Scotland affiliates to. You know, for example, NATO. I imagine most people here are quite hostile to the idea of joining NATO. I am. There's also the question of joining the European Union. Who decides these? Basically what I'm asking is, who decides these? Is it the Scottish Government that's elected in 2016? Or do the people decide? Are we democratically consulted through a referendum? Now, if you think about this, there's secondary questions come out of this. For example, what about we're creating a new nation state. What about a constitution? What about our actual citizens' rights being enshrined in a constitution? How's this done? Is this done by electing a government in 2016, or are the people consulted collectively and voting it again? And all of a sudden you start seeing, to build a new nation state and to consult with the people, it's going to need regular consultation, and it's going to mean a series of democratic referendum. And I believe that we don't have the democratic infrastructure to carry this out. Even this referendum that we're going to be having next year, it was costed at some 13.3 million. 8.8 million of that's going to be spent on actually the physical carrying out of the referendum. I think it's money well spent. I think everybody else would agree with this. But it also means massive planning in advance, where you have to book primary schools, community centres, town halls. You have to get an army of staff and volunteers and all the boxes, and then you have to fly them all in. This is not a This is a Victorian institute. This is a Victorian form of democracy, where you put a cross in the box and it gets trudged down to a community centre and it gets sent back, and you wait for almost 24 hours before you get results. The Electoral Commission, after the cock-up in Sheffield in 2010, they specifically said, I've got a quote here, it basically said that it's not fit for purpose. The type of democracy that we're inheriting from Britain, from the British state, it's not fit for purpose, and it's definitely not fit for creating a new democratic state. I don't believe it can be done unless we've got electronic voting, where every person over the age of 16 is able to vote in their home, through the internet, through their mobile phones, through interactive TV, or through an electoral machine. I don't think it can be done without that. That's a modern electronic democracy. It's not a new idea. This is the thing, that democracy is something that is feared in Britain. They fear popular participation. They don't tell you that Brazil introduced electronic voting in 2000. They don't tell you that India introduced electronic voting in 2004. India, by the way, has an electorate of 715 million people, not 5 million. And the people who oversee the electoral system in India, they offered to help Britain. They saw the mess that the British Electoral Commission made it in Sheffield, and they offered to help and install an electronic voting system. But of course, the British don't like that idea. It's very, it's a bit too modern for the British state. The very idea of having a modern democracy. This isn't, this might not seem like a big radical idea, but we are going to be wanting to consult with it. I believe in the sovereignty of the people over Parliament. It's a very Scottish idea. The British system has always been the sovereignty of the king, which was then replaced by the sovereignty of the Parliament. But it was an old Scottish idea, the sovereignty of the people over Parliament. And I think this is something that we need to embrace, and an electronic democracy puts us down that road. Because think about it, all these ideas that we're discussing, they're very important ideas. If we don't go down the road of referendum, and we do leave it to the parties that's elected in 2016, and basically we're leaving it to 53,000 people, because that's the total membership of all the political parties in Scotland. It's 53,000. It's just about 1.2% of the Scottish population. It means that the other 3,950,000 have to put a cross in the box in 2016 and sit and watch our country being assembled by the people who are put together by these 53,000 in Parliament. So I don't believe that's a system, the cross in a box system, is viable for a modern 21st century Scottish democracy. And I believe we should have the best kind of democracy that money can't buy, and we should have the best kind of democracy that the Scottish people can utilise and solve our own problems, because these are the tools in which we want to facilitate the type of changes that we've outlined and that other people have suggested and that are coming through all over Scotland for 2014 beyond. I would just sort of finish on this point on the question of letting the people decide. The best form of democracy in Europe, without a doubt, is in Switzerland. Switzerland's the most democratic country in Europe easily. We've got a Swiss person here, I don't know. But they've had over 500 referendum in recent years. In Britain we've had 2 since we got the vote in 1928. We had 2. In America they've never had any. In Germany they don't have any. So you see that that we have to borrow from best practice, and I believe it's a necessity. But also, I'm just going to finish on this point. Think about it. If the population of Scotland is able to vote quickly on any subject, could be consulted on anything. Just think how we can reimagine democracy and reimagine our country if we actually have the means to take our decisions fast. In 2003, imagine we'd be able to consult the whole population quickly, electronically, on whether we go to war.
Yes.
You know, these sort of things can be done. We have to actually think of the democratic possibilities of electronic democracy. It might not seem like a glamorous, radical thing, but it's the tools that can carry change through. So I'd just like to raise that possibility. And I will be writing about this in Caledonia and developing it and trying to get information from best practice over the next year and a half and throw it into the mix of what we're trying to do for Scotland.